Okay, hello everyone. We are expecting a few more people to be joining us, and I see that some people are still connecting to audio. So we're just going to wait another moment. In the meantime, I may as well tell you who I am. I'd like to say hello. My name is Charlotte Mucan. I am the director of the Pelham Art Center in Pelham, New York. And we have been conducting a series of virtual studio visits since the COVID situation began. And I have to say that I have learned so much from each one of these. And it's been a real honor to learn about artists and their journey and who they are and what their artistic process is like, because I really believe that in sharing those journeys and learning about art, it really just helps us as humans to see the world around us and art that is with us. So I want to just say thank you so much for being here today. We do have some interesting studio visits coming up for the rest of the month of August. We are doing these on a regular basis. So we will be doing these on Thursdays at 5 o'clock, at least for the next few months and most likely through the next year. So thank you so much for being here. I know we are going to have some more people joining us, but also I do like to start things on time. So we're going to go ahead and start. We are really excited today to be visiting Mark Eisendrath in Baltimore. So I'm going to go ahead and spotlight him and we're going to begin. So here we go. Oh, I'm sorry, a few housekeeping things. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to use the chat bar. If you have background noise around you, please stay on mute. And we will turn this into a more casual question and answer and conversation element towards the end. So thank you so much. Okay, and here we are with Mark.
Hi.
Hey.
All right, so where do we start here?
Well, Mark, I'd love if you could just start off by telling us a bit about who you are and where you are. And I know you have some incredible things to show us. So let's start with the basics.
Sure. This is Mark Eisendrath calling in from Baltimore, Maryland. Calling from my home and studio. And I'm a sculptor here in Baltimore. And I typically work with wood. And I'd love to show you around a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the camera around and show you a little bit of our surroundings and then take you down into the shop.
Nice.
All right. I'm trying to get my fingers out of the way here. All right. Above the TV here, we've got a recent piece made out of poplar, which is a soft hardwood. The intent here was basically to play a satin sort of sheen off of a very, very matte surface and to try to get the positive and negative juxtaposition in there. This piece is 24 by 36 inches and is comprised out of cross-cut tiles out of an ancient beam that was excavated here by a utility company in Baltimore. And I'm going to bring the camera in tight to see the construction here. A little bit of natural light to help. Over here, this material here is a powdered suede, which brings up a very kind of a velvet texture and just absorbs all the light that's thrown at it. But again, it's the same material as what's happening over here. Panning over to the left here, we've got an earlier piece called Every Hero Needs a Villain. Just getting some really beautiful light at the moment.
I was just commenting before we started this call about how much I loved that piece on your website. Can you tell us a little bit about the title and the thinking of those lines?
Sure. The title actually came from a conversation I had with my kids, who are now teenagers, but back then were young boys, and we were watching the Austin Powers movie trilogy, and one of my boys asked why Austin Powers doesn't just kill Dr. Evil. And number one, I said, well, there'd be no more movies. And that sort of spun off into a conversation about heroes needing villains and vice versa to continue the chase. And this was actually my first foray into actual wood joinery. And you can see how each of these slats is joined in kind of a traditional glue up kind of manner. And there's about 1.5 inches of depth here.
Is that the end grain to the plywood that we're seeing?
Yes.
Okay.
Over here?
Yeah, no, on the face.
Yes, all the way through.
Oh, got it. Cool.
Yeah.
It makes that nice horizontal detail. Yeah, it's great.
And over here above the fireplace, we've got this piece that was made out of one enormous piece of ash that was plucked from our family farm in northern Michigan.
That's really incredible when you know the tree, or if you know exactly where the tree was sourced.
Oh yeah. And if my dad is in attendance here, I'm sure he can attest. We both know exactly where it came from. And as you can, go ahead.
When did you start using wood as your material?
Well, I think it was, I got interested in using wood when the pieces I was making out of paper, which here's a good example over here. We're getting so built up with texture and collage elements that they were literally falling apart. And so I needed something more substantial and durable, but that could still absorb the processes I was doing at the time. And so I got into wood, and actually, I'm sure a lot of woodworkers or even hobbyists could attest that it takes a really long time to understand anything about wood. And I figured out that even after I had been working with wood for years, I still didn't know much about it. And that's when I noticed the end grain as a teaching element. These pieces are all end grains out of beams. And if you study them, you can really get a sense for how wood dries and how it maneuvers through time.
What I loved about your ash piece was making something beautiful and eternal out of a species that was being wiped out right then.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think what Charlotte, what my dad's referring to is the emerald ash beetle, which was a blight that raced across the Midwest and into the mid-Atlantic, which is a blight, which is basically a bug that invades a specific species, in this case being the ash tree. And it really demolished a large part of the population in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Separately, I'm reading about some things like that as well. But that one specifically with the square and the cracks and then that circle of unity is very poetic.
Mm.
It actually, it's one of my first attempts at actual wood joinery. And it was terrifying. But as you can see, there was some success. You can see the joint there. And given that it was such a large piece and I had no idea how dry it was kind of a shot in the dark. The title of this piece is Come With Me or Get Out of My Way, which is something my dad told everybody when he turned 60.
That was just last week.
He rarely doesn't say stuff like that, so we're just going to keep going. And we're going to go ahead into this gallery room here, which is a little room off of on the first floor here, where I've got a lot of my newer pieces set up. Fortunately, we have some beautiful natural light coming in right now.
I think everybody should have a room in their house like this.
A viewing room. It's perfect. A perfect viewing room.
I'm going to sneak down here to get a look at this piece down low because it's one of the newer pieces. All right, we're going to pan left. See some of these other pieces. If anybody needs me to slow down, zoom in, stop talking, whatever, just please let me know.
Well, while we're viewing, Mark, can you tell us about the color black in your work? Because
Certainly.
those mixed media, the paper piece you showed earlier, there was color. And
Yes.
now we're in this. So if you could speak to that, we'd appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the colors you were seeing in the paper piece that I just focused on prior to this was some welded pigment that I was playing with after my family and I survived a plane crash in December of 2000. I started messing around with the pigments and stuff that reminded me of the embers that were falling from the tree canopy after the plane caught fire and made contact with the ground, or impact, I should say. And while messing around with fire in work, you do end up being faced with the color of charred material, which is black, and how it has this sort of competing duality of compelling you to get really close to it and look further, and also being kind of repelled by it. And then I started to sort of see it as the mother color, how it sort of brings out the best in all the other colors. And as I started to get into the blacks and the woodworking at the same time, I had to, at some point, accept that continuing to char the work would reverse any of the joinery and specific cuts and construction I was doing. So it was really not helpful. So what I started to do was to find a way of emulating the velvety blacks of charring. And so I started making very, very thin layers of blacks and of different sheens, and then continuing to work on the finishing of the wood, smoothing, scuffing, surfacing, to get different textures to sort of play off of themselves. And along with the natural cracking of the material, you get a real interesting visual conversation, seeing the history of the tree itself, the history of woodworking, and you start to see your own reflection a little bit in these satin finishes. I'm going to bring us back a little bit to show this newer piece.
That's great.
And then I'm going to pan right and step away from this larger piece, which was one of the newer ones.
There's something so interesting about the areas where you can see the rings in the trees, in the wood grain, sorry, and that natural cracking, and then the way that's juxtaposed with this strict geometry of the squares.
Yes.
And the square rule following. It's very interesting to have those things next to each other.
I think natural imperfection and geometric symmetry really combine to make a very lively composition or visual conversation, whatever you want to call it.
Agreed. That's a great observation.
Let me see if I can zoom in on this one at this certain light. How's that?
It's good.
Good.
I'm going to pan over here as well. There's some nice stuff happening here.
And some of these you mentioned are more current, but in general, the works in this room are what time period are we?
Late 2017 to current. So not that distant past. And I'm going to come up quickly, closely here, because there's some nice color that's happening on the edge of this piece.
Is that from the burning?
No, actually, as I was saying before, I'm trying to emulate burning without burning. So this is all handwork, and some hand-mixed pigments.
Are these stains or paint, the colors?
Stains, well, a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Mark, Shalipi had a question. Do these pieces continue to crack over time?
They do not.
Okay.
At first, I was not positive, and actually, I did have some pieces that continued to crack.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until really entering the conversation with a buddy out here about kiln drying. And how when I was cutting these tiles out of these ancient beams, there was no real way to predict how dry they were, even though they felt and behaved as if they were dry. And so when I started to talk about my interest in having these things not change and stay static, I started to consider the idea of kiln drying as an option, so I could speed up the drying before they were put in place in the piece.
In the kiln drying process, do these, because you said these are ancient timbers that have been cut up or old, right?
Yeah.
Do they crack more in the kiln, or is there a visual difference before and after?
Yeah, they kind of go berserk. It's actually, it's kind of cool to see the before and after. And the part of me that really wants to get, every part of the process right, gets kind of freaked out by the change, but then I realize that it's actually very helpful to the outcome of the pieces when I'm working like this to accentuate the imperfections.
And do are the pieces cut all into the tile forms first, or do you do larger pieces and then cut them down?
The way the material comes to me is in a very large beam, like if you could picture a railroad tie,
Mm-hmm.
or a load-bearing beam that you see in construction projects. Then the pieces enter a milling process, which squares up the timber, the full length of it, to one uniform dimension, so that I'm taking you guys down to the shop so I can show you what tool is used to cut the tiles. And here's the beginning of the shop. Wall of clamps, because there's never enough. And here we go into a little bit of tool porn.
It's so satisfying to see organized shops.
Well, you got to know where it is, you know? You got to know where that tool is.
I've never known this life.
Neither have I. It's fine.
Toby, you have your own methods.
Whose son are you anyway?
Okay, so as I was describing the milling process on the beams, once they're at a manageable dimension, meaning they will fit on this tool from here to here, then I use this tool to cut the pieces down. And what I end up with is quite literally a tile.
Those are so beautiful in themselves. I haven't spent much time thinking about wood tiles, but really showing the rings, it's beautiful. And even
they really are. Actually, they're really, you know, a lot of folks in the woodworking world don't like to mess around with the end grains because they're too difficult. But to me, it's where everything you need to know about wood happens.
It's such a strong aesthetic too. And to Charlotte's comment about the juxtaposition between the sort of curvy lines that the checking does, or the more chaotic lines, if you will, versus how you're structuring your geometries, there's another parallel in the concentric rings, you know, this sort of circular curvilinear radiance out of every centerpiece that,
yes,
you know, is another level into the minutia sort of that you're working with. It's really beautiful up close. I don't get to see these this close. Usually it's really intense.
Like in this piece here, I wanted to try to use a species of wood. I mean, this is oak, but it's a very tight grain pattern. And this small beam was just super tight, and you can really see what was going on in the life of this tree. And so when the finishing was happening, I saw something that I hadn't seen in these pieces before, was actually because usually the growth lines, the rings, disappear when they're blackened. And in this one, they just were even more pronounced.
Yeah, it's really nice.
And what material do those have on them? This is in process, right?
Yes, this one is already has 2 coats of black India ink and a black lacquer. And once the one element, the final piece of finishing is a beeswax with graphite. which does a very subtle but really beautiful finish on this black. And here's a little piece that's underway as well, and the preparatory sketches, which are always fun to see too.
Mark, what does beeswax do over time?
Beeswax. What do you mean? What it protects and it protects it?
Okay.
Is that the answer you wanted?
Yeah, I mean that's the answer. That's the answer.
I'm glad you asked about that, because Mark and I were speaking the other day about the beeswax, and it's new to me that beeswax and graphite powder combination seems so interesting, and that it holds up, but then the graphite all stays there, because loose graphite paper also, that's kind of can get very unruly easily.
Oh, it's a total disaster. Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets in your nose, it gets in your ears, it gets under your safety glasses. It's a total mess.
So how do you apply the graphite powder and then put the beeswax paste, I guess, on top? What kind of applicator do you use? Or
I'll show you actually. I'm going to spin you around. This is a new piece that's again juxtaposed positive and negatives, which I'm really interested in, and I have no idea why. Can we just settle on the fact that it's cool?
That works.
And that's enough?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Okay, cool.
that's mom talking.
Hi, Mama.
Hi, darling.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can find the graphite. Yep. Okay, so Charlotte, here's the powdered graphite.
mm-hmm.
And this is a kind of it's actually used in the car detailing world.
Oh.
Called turtle wax. It's a blend of coniba and beeswax and then a bunch of oils. It's uninteresting to see what's in it, but for the most part it's beeswax, and then I dump the powdered graphite in and you get this slop, and then you rub it on with as stable a cloth as you've got and let it dry, and then buff it up. And the more you buff, the shinier it gets. And when you have graphite infused in it, it does something special. I'm not really sure how to define it, but it makes for a very sexy finish.
So how did you discover that car wax? Like,
I was not satisfied by the other more traditional beeswaxes that have been made for woodworking, and so a colleague recommended I get a different buffing pad, number one, and that brought me. And it was only available through auto supply stores, and that brought me into the polishing aisle of an aggressively unremarkable car detailing supply store, and I stumbled across the turtle wax.
and does that mean that, I'm thinking about that in relationship to cars, and I know you've done some public sculpture, but that in theory, once that's on as a top coat, that they would hold up to the elements?
It depends. That piece was, to a certain degree, I guess, to answer your question, will it hold up over time for four seasons through the year? doubtful. It's the beeswax is typically used as a clear coat in the automotive industry.
Mhm.
For woodworking, it would not be a permanent solution for exterior woodwork.
Mhm.
In those cases, you use a spar varnish, which is a nautical varnish, or a polyurethane, and then pray. The piece that you were referring to was vandalized and then unfortunately destroyed by the elements.
As you're taking us around here, I'm really noticing the way you're making those decisions about where to line up the cracks,
Yeah.
where not to line up the cracks, and those become, I mean, very much like topographical maps. I mean, the metaphor of pathways throughout circular stopping points or phases. I feel like there's definitely like a heavy metaphor or poetry in the way these are assembled.
And it's by far the I think most enjoyable part of this process. Making those kind of decisions, and teasing yourself with precision when what you really want is not precision. And then sort of, worrying yourself into action when it comes to making a decision about how these cracks talk to each other. How does the elimination of a crack, like how it sits like right here, how the milling of the material comes straight together, which would be, at the end invisible. How does that parlay into the rest of this moment here?
The cool thing is that the material itself is visually preventing precision, which makes it really interesting.
The eye kind of, it's basically, I mean, it's not three-dimensional, but it's close to that. So it's very much like a drawing that's done in dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it dabbles. For me, it's like it's more of a cosmic. I'm seeing more of a cosmic angle on this stuff, not more than you're describing, but just sort of a deeper narrative of like. Of course, for me, the mandala is a central focal point, and you see that in the concentric rings, and then you got these lines, which I'm just riffing here, but the lines are kind of like the way we navigate across this sort of much larger, ubiquitous universe as I see it. It's neat because that's really what the artist does too, is he synthesizes different realities, and I even the way you were just talking about, and Charlotte was making that reference to the 2D and the 3D, that's another synthesis that you bring, where these translate so nicely to dimensional work from sketches, yet they don't, they're not, while they are 3D, they're not necessarily, that extra sculptural in the round.
Right.
But, you're riffing and you're hinting, which I think is very elegantly done.
Well, it's funny too, as you're describing that, I'm thinking about how I kind of chase my own tail when I'm making these things. Is I really get on myself about precision and getting measurements and cuts right.
Yeah.
And then scold myself when I don't do it right. But then in the end, it's a more enticing piece when it's not precise.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always that point of departure where you have an idea, but then that decisive moment where the piece and the way it wants to go becomes more interesting in a way. Like you're cutting up all these Triscuits or these tiles, but then every tile has its own character.
Right.
So then you get to see, well, what is the tile doing? What is that line pointing to?
Yeah.
But you have to start with a vision and get going.
Sure.
So there is that dance.
And they all do. They all start in the sketchbook. Well, they usually start with, you know, a barcode off of a Bartlett pear, or something from the grocery store, or
Sure.
something from Amazon, and then I start to sketch, and then sooner rather than later, I'm building something that looks a lot like that, but has a different flavor to it.
Mm-hmm. It's alchemy.
That was so beautifully said, Toby. Just everything you just said. I was thinking about similar concepts and almost like a microcosm, macrocosm way, and kind of the metaphors of life seen within the rings, or the passing of time, and then that connection, or the connection of pathways or lines. It is. There's a lot more to this work once you really start to look at those details, and that's definitely. I think it's very beautiful.
Thank you.
Mark, can you tell us a little bit about your background as well and your training?
Sure. Background was, I don't think not hugely unique in up until college, but I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and studied illustration because it was a very wide open major at the time. And the advice I had gotten when I got to RISD was find one teacher and stick with him. And I did. And his whole thing was abstraction, but also a working theory of his, which continues in me and him, was that you can't make a good abstract painting if you don't know the figure. And so I stuck to drawing from the figure and from observation for a couple of years, and then started moving into the dimensions by using clay. And then that sort of got me working in a way that was much more sculptural than painterly. I'll just take you through some of the tools here. Did that answer your question, Charlotte?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, I think that's a pretty good pan of the shop here. And the work's in progress.
What's behind the curtain? I want to know. Is that where the wizard lives? Is that where you go?
That's the laundry, Toby.
Oh, all right. Fine.
I think we're gonna go back upstairs. Some wheeled entertainment.
I was thinking about those, actually. I was going to ask a question about those skateboarders.
Sure.
Are you a skateboarder?
Yes.
And then have you thought about creating art with skateboards? Because I know there's so many.
I have not, because I like what I do, and I like the result, and I know what skateboarding does to objects. It just destroys things. So the closest I can come to utilitarian stuff are tables. And this was a nice collaboration between a friend of mine here and I.
It's a gorgeous table.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Is that
I like
pop?
that. Go ahead, Charles.
Is that
What's the wood?
Spalted maple.
maple?
Mm. I like the
A nice
the
little
little
tusk out
leg.
here, so it stays up.
Yeah, I like that guy.
Well, you know, Osamu Noguchi said that the best furniture is just sculpture laying down.
Mm. Mm. Nice quote.
Yep. I think that's going to do it, guys.
And then can you show us those other tables? I think they're right over there.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of an industrial design element to go into the furniture.
Oh, yeah. Oof. Sorry.
And is that something you still do?
Occasionally, yes.
Occasionally. Or you would do on commission?
I would do on commission, yes.
That's very nice.
And we're going to pan over here across the couch to this big fella. It's a solid stacked laminated plywood.
You mentioned Noguchi and some of those curves. Have you seen the Andy Goldsworthy line work that he's done in the clay walls?
Yes, yes. Actually, you mean this one?
Yes.
Look no further.
Here's the top of that piece here.
It's nice. I
And
like how
then,
you take control of the plywood with a curve, with a curvy, the curve linear.
well, again, it goes with that round natural form against the hard geometry. So
Mhm.
it's using the same vocabulary.
Agree.
Well, but also it's kind of that tension of opposites too.
Mhm.
They work
Right.
with it. They work with each other.
Yeah.
So we mentioned Noguchi and we mentioned Andy Goldsworthy just now. But do you have any other influences and people that have inspired you that you'd like to speak about?
Well, I think it's kind of a trick question in a way. It's like asking what your favorite color is. Kind of changes with the day. But like I think a bookshelf is a good way to look at that.
I think a big influence is Jim Harrison.
Well, I think we can go to the poetry section. Yes.
That's funny.
I mean, anything from Customato and Mike Tyson all the way across to Charles Bukowski, and then into Jim Harrison and the outdoor writer poets. But in terms of actual, the actual artists that inspire me, it just varies, or stimulate me, I should say. I think Richard Serra's drawings are beautiful. Richard Diebenkorn is one of the only painter who paints work that you need to look into, not at, which is just a great thing to push yourself to. And then one of the masters of black in the painting world is Pierre Soulages. And the minimalist painters of Agnes Martin and a couple others really hit me too.
Mm-hmm. And what Louise Nevelson with the black and the wood and the combines?
I never spent a whole lot of time looking at her work, but one of the first, I was brought a book by a classmate at RISD by this guy, David Nash. And he was actually physically charring wood. And at that point, I was charring paper. And it helped to show me that there was a place to go with this, with what I was doing. And I think the work of Peter Volkos in the clay world is really helpful to look at when you're not working with clay.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I'd asked an artist this question when their bookshelf is right there, but it is so neat that you could do that the answers are right here.
Well, I think having the true squad of my parents in this and my buddy Toby, they could attest that I do read a ton of poetry, and I do love the work of certain writers, and actually they're probably as close to inspirations as any physical painter or sculptor.
Mm-hmm. And then I would love for you to speak a little bit about this public art piece. particularly this one.
Mm-hmm. Beethoven's
So,
Chainsaw. Yep.
And there may be people on the call who've seen this in person. I have not. But can you tell us just how that came to be, or how that happened, and the interest in public art?
Certainly. I'm going to flip the camera back around
Absolutely.
to me. Hello. There. Beethoven's Chainsaw came to me through a art dealer who I guess had heard my name at a art fair, and she looked at my work and really liked what I was doing and asked me to put a proposal together for a public piece. And it was, I guess, about 6 months from the original conversation to installation. And I used all timbers from railway projects and construction projects that were that they wanted the construction to reference how the town came to be, which was the railroads. And so that's what was done. And I wanted it to be, I don't know, I was really liking the idea of an archway, and really wanted to sort of quietly reference the railway without being too specific. So I used those metal bands on the exterior of the arch to do that work for me. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's such a great opportunity, and that's pretty fast to have it go, be 6 months from first conversation to
It was
installation on site.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the project only lived there for 6 months before the vandals got there,
Right.
which is unfortunate. But everybody kind of
Always risk with public art, definitely. I always a
well,
risk,
what was great is there was a great art dealer who really had everybody's back. She wasn't just, you know, working on behalf of the client. She really had both of our interests at heart, and ended up just helping everybody wash their hands of it. And then there was no bitter taste in anybody's mouth. It was just something that happened, and it stunk, but that was just the facts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was driving home from my son's wedding this weekend, and my girlfriend and mother and I were all discussing this idea of failure forward learning.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at EMU, about to drop out of EMU in the teaching program there, because I realized I would rather make art than philosophize about it or be unreal about it. There was this idea that came about failure first, how failure is literally, it's the tool that informs and kind of frees you to keep going with the work. It gives you ideas, but it also shakes you up and, brings you back into the fray, this sort of reintegrating. And if a lot of people don't understand, I think that when failure occurs, it's a chance to see, the old Edison quote, it's so cliche, but like he's talking to his apprentice and had made 1,000 light bulbs. Mr. Edison, we made 1,000 light bulbs. Should we give up? And he says, that's 1,000 things we know not to do. And I mean, if that's not the teaching in the shop, what does wood do? Oh, it does that. That wasn't, I had a cup of coffee and I imagined it going this way, but the wood was in the kiln overnight and it's going this way.
Yep.
And boy, that's a conversation worth having,
It totally is.
So embrace that. That's how you get the magic.
Yep. What do you think, Charlotte? Is that it?
I know I really enjoyed this. I learned a lot and I greatly appreciate it. I have your website up as well, and I'm just noticing like all of your titles. And can you speak for a minute about the way you title your work in general?
Sure. Or like the story of every hero has a villain. A lot of, I don't know. I mean, when I'm making work, I'm always reminiscing about the past, or what just happened, distant past, closer past, whatever. And and the radio's always on, and so sometimes there's just great little tidbits from conversations I've had with friends, family, that I write down and keep in a notebook, or pieces of a song that I hear that I throw together that make some sense, or little actual snippets from conversations I've had with my kids or somebody else. But really, it's a chance for free association. Sometimes the titles are so juicy, you just got to put them into the world. And whether they actually stick to the piece as the name of that piece, or just something that follows it. Like some of the more inspirational titles I have are, real heavy pieces of my history that just need to be attached to something strong.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
It does. I really
Cool.
appreciate that explanation as well. I'm just reading all of them on your website as well, which is, again, it's poetic. I see the poetry influence not only in the work but in the titles.
Charlotte, I have a question for people who were not able to join and see this. It's been so interesting. I have a list of people in my mind who I know would love to see it. Is it available for a few days, or?
Well, I'm going to send Mark the recording, and we'll figure that out.
Okay, because they can certainly make a contribution as well.
Well, thank you so much. Also, I just have to say, we had almost 10 people sign up, so I really don't know what happened to our group here, but it is their loss.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
Because I mean, I love looking at nature and at art and art made out of nature. So this is right up my alley. Great. So Mark, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you. I can't thank you enough for talking to us today. And do you have anything you want to kind of end note on?
I just want to say right back at you, Charlotte. This has been such a pleasure. And I really enjoyed our introductory conversation when we did this before. And this has been really fun.
Mark,
Absolutely.
Mark, great.
Yes.
What's that?
I was just going to say, I completely agree. I have never met anyone who survived a plane crash before. And that is incredible. It really blew my mind when I heard about that. And we didn't talk about it on this call, but also relating with the vision elements and the cracks in the sidewalks. There's so much, there's so much more we could talk about.
Yeah.
But
well, give me a call anytime.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I can't thank you enough. And I will follow up tomorrow with Mark about the video, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Charlotte.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.